This is one of 4 RTX 5070s in the world, and no, I didn't buy it, that would be ridiculous. And this is a Peltier that I bought off of Aliexpress. And you know what that means.
Oh! It's crashed. I think it's crashed.
But first, if like me you wish you could do computer stuff beyond just sucking at video games, today's video sponsor is for you, Boot.dev. Boot.dev is one hell of a tool to learn your way around the back end of some web development. All of the Boot.dev lessons are very hands-on, so you write a whole bunch of code in either Python or Go programming languages. And with every lesson you finish, you'll gain levels, XP, and finish quests so you can climb your way up the global leaderboard. Because nothing motivates gamers harder than pawning some noobs on a leaderboard. And if you're still on the fence, go try out some free lessons. The boot.dev link is down below. Try it out today. The 5070 in question was very kindly sent over by Colorful, and it's a real nice version of the card, and it even comes with some interesting accessories. Ooh, an e-game screwdriver, nice. And then you also get a dual 8-pin to Arson adapter and a solid metal GPU rest stand. I mean, you know I'm a sucker for a knurled knob, and the inclusion of this stand does hint at the heft of our 5070. This e-game Advanced has a pretty big cooler with a nice mixture of materials, from a metal backplate to this frosted plastic shroud, which looks pretty cool. And aside from a real dense fin stack with 7 heat pipes, there's also the modern obligatory blow-through cooler on the back. There's also a turbo button on the rear I/O, which is amazing. It switches between 2 BIOSes. The only real issue with it is that the button isn't clicky enough for my liking. Generally, this colorful cooler seems pretty awesome. It's just a shame there's a 5070 under that heatsink. But having said that, we are going to need all the cooling capacity we can get for that Peltier cooler. But before we violate this unicorn, let's drop it in a system and see what kind of temperature performance we get from it. But straight off the bat, something was wrong. Oh no, I forgot to plug the AIO in. So this is Cyberpunk running at 1440p ultra ray tracing with just a dab of DLSS going. And, well, 60-ish frames per second, 70. I don't have a lot of context for what's happening here. What I can say is that the CPU is struggling. it does not like ultra ray tracing settings, apparently. Temperature-wise, we're doing great. It makes sense. There's a huge cooler just dealing with about 220-ish watts, which is about 30 watts less than the TDP of the card. That's nice to see. Yesterday, I managed to pick up a 9070 online. So when its ass shows up over the next 2 or so weeks via Llama Mail, I'll compare it to the 5070 and some other 200 watt-ish cards. I'm curious about that power draw category. So subscribe if you want to see that. And what's interesting with Silent Hill 2, with ray tracing on at 1440p high settings, the power draw is actually lower than with Cyberpunk. But anyway, we'll talk more about that in a follow-up video. For now, we need to deal with these unacceptable temperatures. I mean, 50 degrees Celsius, what are we, mercury peasants? Which I think means it's time for some thermal electric cooling. Now, to explain what this thermal electric cooler is, we need a quick segment of Dawid Does Science. Now, basically how it works is if you pump a bunch of electricity between 2 surfaces made of different conductive materials, this enrages Zeus, and in his ensuing rampage he commits a bunch of war crimes, which leads to wild opposition between the 2 materials. So the one side becomes all hot and aroused, and the other side becomes cold and barren. And if you cool the hot side well enough, you get a very cold side, which you can use to cool like graphics cards and stuff. The thing is, this TEC112715, very catchy name, doesn't come terminated with any connectors on the ends of its wires, which means we need to solder a connector onto this. Now, this specific Peltier draws about 150-ish watts, which means we might be able to get away with a Molex connector? Let's see what happens. Now, as far as I understand this process, we have to connect the red wire to the yellow wire on the Molex connector, because that is the 12-volt cable, and then the black wire goes onto the black. Okay, now this is definitely not the second connector because I somehow managed to screw up the first one. Don't ask me how, I don't really know. Now the next step, which does feel a little bit like a terrible idea, but is to see which is the hot and which is the cold side. So I'm gonna turn it on with no cooling and then just kind of touch the sides and see, I guess. I'm also curious if it's gonna catch on fire. But I need to be very quick about this. That'll help, right? That'll definitely make a difference. Okay. That is definitely the hot side. That got hot very quickly. So basically, we want the text facing the GPU and the not text facing the cooler. So now we're gonna do a quick teardown on the card. It looks like it's gonna be really straightforward. We've just got that many screws and then it comes off. Ooh, these screws are so short. They're definitely not going to be able to accommodate the extra thickness of the thermoelectric cooler. Now first off, that is an absurd cooler. Look at all that heat pipe and fin stack. We've got a bunch of good contact with the memory and the GPU. We're gonna need some much thicker thermal pads and stuff so that we still make contact with the power delivery, even though we've got a pretty big thing wedged in here. And then here is our just wildly beefy PCB. Look at that power delivery. It is very impressive. It's just a shame we've got a 5070 in here, to be honest. This is a PCB befitting a much more grandiose graphics card. It's quite a wimpy little dime. What is promising about it though, for our thermoelectric cooling, is that it doesn't have kind of raised boundaries around the side. We're just gonna have to be careful about even mounting pressure so that it doesn't kind of lift off like that, you know? And that we don't accidentally crack the die. And with me done ogling the PCB, it was time to figure out how to mount the cooler with the additional girth of our thermoelectric cooler. The stock GPU mounting screws were definitely not long enough, but luckily I found different screws that perfectly fit the GPU mounting. The only problem was they were way too long, but that's a problem easily dremeled away. So I measured the length of the stock screws and added it to the girth of the thermoelectric cooler. I then just marked the 4 screws and got to cutting. I guess that sounds like screw cutting power. Ha ha ha! I need gloves. But even with the gloves, my complete lack of precision made it pretty clear to me that I need like a vice or something. But either way, the result was almost there. I mean, it's not perfect, but that's pretty good. But then I realized I could just cut the screws with pliers, which was way more accurate and much easier. Which meant with my 4 very professionally cut screws and the thicker thermal pads arriving, I was ready to attempt the Peltier cooler mount. The packet of the 3mm one is way smaller than I was expecting. Oops. Didn't just drop that on the graphics card. I kind of wanted 4mm pads because that would have just been a straight add-on. I'm gonna just stack the 3mm pads on the stock pads that come on the card. Okay, so we have some absurdly chunky thermal pad going on here, which means the next step is to place the Peltier down. Now, in terms of thermal paste, I'm gonna use the Thermal Hero Quantum because apparently it is super, uber, ultra, extra, ultra high-end thermal paste. Place the Peltier down. We're gonna like smoosh it nicely. There's a bunch of stuff not making contact. I need more thermal pad. Yeah, I don't know. 3 layers of thermal pad seems perfectly reasonable. This isn't a terrible idea at all. It does feel a lot more stable in its position. So I guess the next step is to screw the GPU down and then I'll have a look.
A few moments later.
These screws don't have a big enough head to, oh, that's a disaster. And when it became clear that the stock screws really weren't long enough, I desperately went looking for some washers. And after a while of looking, the closest thing I could find were some nuts. But hey, if it works, it works. And with that, the mounting process could begin. Now, because the tips of the screws were so chankily cut, they were really difficult to align with the screw holes, and that combined with some real unfortunate cracking coming from the graphics card made this by far the most unpleasant cooler mounting I've ever done. Oh my god, this feels like I'm committing a war crime. This is really crazy. But soon, I was ready to see if I'd broken this unicorn. I don't think I've ever been this scared turning a PC on. Now, I'm not immediately going to turn the Peltier on because I don't know how cold it's going to get and I don't want condensation to happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it on without the Peltier on, and then I'm going to turn the Peltier on and immediately start FurMark so that I get a bunch of load on the GPU so that it doesn't get too cold. Is that a risk here? I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to turn it on. I'm so scared. That's a good start. That's a very good start. We have a signal out. Oh, thank God. That crunching? Never mind. The graphics card's very hot. Okay. I'm gonna turn the power supply on. Whoa, the CPU temp is immediately, the GPU temp is immediately dropping. 28. Oh, it's dropping really quickly. What's the dew point today? I don't know. Run. 20. Okay, it's clearly working. So we need a bit of load. It's immediately overheating. The moment, oh, it didn't like that. We're gonna have to rethink the mounting. Oh, it's crashed. I think it's crashed. Do I turn stuff off? Probably. Turning things off feels like a good idea. And after that, what I can only describe as panic, I remounted the cooler with more mounting pressure this time and using a lot more screws once I realized that the stock PCB screws still reached. Now again, the GPU is very hot because there's a Peltier in between it and its cooler, so it makes sense. So now that we've got FurMark ready to go, I'm gonna just turn the Peltier on. The temperature immediately drops. Look at that, that's impressive, how quickly that happens. It's dropping way faster than last time as well. So I think our mounting is a lot better. 20, 27, we're gonna get to sub 20. Yes, 19, 18. Okay, now I'm starting to get concerned. And the moment the donut happens, it overheats. I think our Peltier is not strong enough. But before a final check on the mounting, I just wanted to see how low we could get the idle temperature. And it bottomed out around 10 degrees Celsius before I started worrying about condensation and stuff and turned the Peltier off. And after seeing there was clearly good spread on the thermal paste, I did some research and it turns out Peltier coolers are way more effective cooling loads that are much lower than their rated power draw. That's why this 130 watt Peltier happily managed the GPU while it was idle, but the moment that it drew 220 watts, the GPU just wildly overwhelmed the Peltier. So unfortunately, this little Peltier isn't going to be able to handle the GPU with any real load on it. Luckily, there is a company that makes an absurd 330 watt Peltier that's small enough to fit around the die. And of course, I've ordered one of these, which is going to take a while, but it's on its way. So subscribe to the channel if you want to see the follow-up to this experiment with almost 3 times the carnage. Because unfortunately, the best our pathetic little 130 watt cooler can handle is 10 degrees Celsius idle on the 5070. So with that, thank you for watching, and until the next video, bye bye.